Okay, hello everybody. My name is Kristine Jorgensen. I'm going to talk about the Gameworld interface. This is a screenshot from, I can see it, you probably see it better on the other screens. It's a screenshot from Uncharted 3. And when I play this game, I'm navigating the game by using the environment itself as an informational space. I'm looking at whatever is there. Where can I climb? What can I do? How can I get through this space just by looking at the environment itself? So the game world itself, the game space, is basically a puzzle that I need to navigate in order to be able to play the game. Compare this with World of Warcraft. Well, of course, I do some of the same things. I'm using the game world itself, looking for cues in the game world to try to navigate the world, try to get around. But still, this world is also augmented by different kinds of information that, well, somebody would not say that they are diegetic or they are not part of the fictional universe. You have these question marks, exclamation marks above people's or characters' heads. You have these, cones of light, green light that surrounds the characters. You also have what you would normally call HUDs, like overlay information, such as here you have quest information in the pop-up window. You have character health bars, issues like that. These are issues that are very much different from what you see in if we go back to Uncharted 3, where there is virtually almost no overlay information. The only thing you can see here that is overlaid is basically the information about what kind of weapon you use up in the upper left corner and how much ammo you have left. And basically that information will not be on the screen at all times. I guess that this is not the screenshot that I took, but I guess that the reason why we can see this overlay here is because the players just change weapons. Normally you won't see anything of that. So you see that there are very different approaches to game user interface design, and these approaches very many would use Bolter and Grusen's way of understanding these two to say that okay, this is the difference between hypermediacy and immediacy. And these two are, of course, the two styles that Bolter and Grusen are talking about when they talk about the styles of computer mediums. So hypermediacy is basically what they call a style of visual representation whose goal is to remind the viewer of the medium, like in World of Warcraft. All these elements are there to provide very clear and penetrating information to the player. Then you also have the style of immediacy, which is a style of visual representation, whose goal is to make the viewer forget the presence of the medium and believe that he is in the presence of the objects of representation. You could say that that is what Uncharted 3 does. It does try to pretend that this is not mediated. You're just interacting with the game world directly as if it were the physical world itself. That's at least the theory behind that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use these two ways of understanding the game world as an interface, but I'm also going to use to make a criticism of these ways of understanding the styles, the user interface design styles of virtual worlds or game worlds. So, and of course, there are some issues. I think I'm going to argue that the game world is an interface, and that might seem very controversial for some of you at the point of departure. But the thing is, it also depends on, of course, how I define both interface and game world. And as you will see, this is what it comes down to. So if you look at it from a traditional perspective, how we normally, or how the theory or how the literature normally look at what an interface is, the dictionary itself, here in this case, the Merriam-Webster dictionary, says that an interface is a common boundary or interconnection between systems, equipment, concepts, or human beings. So it's a fairly general concept. It's just kind of some kind of surface between two platforms. It could be, a computer screen, but it could also be human skin. It could be a window or a doorway. It could be very many different things. It's just kind of something that connects to different spheres. Of course, if you go to computer science or interaction design and related fields, you can see that interface is very often understood as a part of the system that you see, hear, or feel, and that allows users to interact with the computer. So I'm just have to see what, yeah, okay. Maybe I should wait a bit with that one. So, of course, I'm kind of taking both of these perspectives into account. But in a sense, I'm also trying to be precise in the sense that I want to see that the interface is basically, you could in many ways just say that it is the medium. It's some kind that makes it possible for us to interact with something else. And if you look at that, you could say that, of course, the game world, it could be an interface. So another thing that I think that is the consequence of my perspective of this is that I don't want to say that the interface is the medium itself. It can't be reduced just to the tool that you interact with the game with. I think that the interface itself, if I look upon the game world as an interface, then I believe it's the interface, the game world interface is basically the content of the game. And here you could, I want to reflect Levmanovic's perspective on that. He's also criticizing Bolter and Grus's view, and he says that the interface in modern digital media is motivated by a work's content to such a degree that it can no longer be thought of as a separate level. Instead, content and interface merge into one entity, and they can no longer be taken apart. And I think that is what is happening when I talk about the game world as an interface. And of course, another perspective of this is that, or the fact that I'm looking upon the game world as an interface, is that our experience with any kind of technology is based upon the interaction that we are allowed to do through the interface. We don't, or we very, very rarely actually experience the technology itself, what is behind. We do experience any kind of technology through its interface. And that's also why we should see the interface not necessarily as the medium or the tool itself, but the content of of the technology of the computer medium. So of course, now you probably wonder, but what about the game world? Okay, I've said something about the interface, my perspective on that. But what about the game world and all this? I'm talking about the game world. I mean, we've been talking a lot about game world, game space, things like that. I'm not really going into a discussion about space here. But I want to say that the game world itself, I don't want to say that it's the same as a fictional world or a virtual world or anything like that. I'm calling it here just to have a very short and definition for the sake of the argument here. I would say that the game world is a virtual and artificial environment that is designed with gameplay in mind. And it's very important to see that it's designed with the activity of gameplay in mind. The game world itself also has a lot of properties, of course. One thing is that it has the property of worldness. And worldness could be described as qualities that make a certain world unique and distinguishable from other kinds of worlds. Also, it's qualities that make game worlds or worlds, they are given a certain degree of self-containedness. And also, it's qualities that invite specific navigational properties and properties of interaction. Looked at from this perspective, we can say that the game environment could also be seen as an ecological space of interaction where inhabitants and environments have an impact on each other. And that's also very central for my understanding of the game world. And then, of course, the game world is also an activity space. It's basically very central to this understanding. It's designed with a particular kind of activity in mind, which I said, gameplay. And it's also built for the purpose of gameplay and also governed by game mechanics or game rules. So why is the game world also an interface? I believe there are many reasons for that, but I think that I'm going to delimit myself to two arguments, and I can see that they are listed in the wrong direction, but it doesn't really matter. There are two reasons here. One is that the game world is representational, and the other is that the game world is an informational space. So, the game world is representational. We've also been talking about that. There are very many ways that the game world itself can be representational. I want to say here that one thing is that it could be seen as a world metaphor that contextualizes some abstract game mechanics, some abstract rule systems. And we can say that there is a process of reification going on that allows the player, because of this, the representational surface, it allows the player to redirect attention away from the game mechanics and the rules and towards the environment itself. So when you play a game, you can think about, okay, how can I interact with this game environment? You don't really have to think about how does the game rules, because the world itself kind of, in a way, tells you that. And also, it's of course also a world representation that resembles and imitates other kinds of worlds, whether they are fictional or physical. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but I think that this is also the key. This way of thinking about Gameworld as representation is also key to think about fiction in terms of, or in relation to game worlds. Because once you have this world representation, it's easy to also kind of add a fictional layer of interpretation to that, which is very powerful in terms of how to understand the game world and understand how the game works. The second reason I believe that the game world should be seen as an interface is because it is an informational space. It does carry information that tells the player how to interact with the game world environment. This information could be, as we saw in Uncharted 3, it could be part of the environment itself. You have to look at the layout of the environment, of the features that exist in that world in order to be able to interact with it. Or it could be, like in World of Warcraft, augmentations into the world that kind of points out what kind of interactions that are possible. This information is also, it must also always be situation appropriate. So there is a reason, there is a game design reason why there is a different approach to this in the two games that I showed. These games are very different, they play differently, they have different kinds of needs of information, and that's why they are designed in the way they are. So I'm not going to go into detail about that here. I also believe that because of this, the game world is an informational space. There is a close functional relationship between that world and between the information that is available, whether that would be like in World of Warcraft, augmentations to the world, or whether that would be like in Uncharted 3, where you basically have to solve the game space as a puzzle itself. There is a very close functional role between these informational pieces and the environment itself. And I believe that any kind of information that tells the player how to interact with the game world must be seen as part of that game world, as long as it supports the gameplay and has impact on the game world. So that basically means that I think that we must consider the exclamation marks above people or characters' heads, also even pop-up information about quests must be considered as part of that game world because of this functional relationship. Yeah, okay. Okay, I think I should. Yeah, I'm going to jump directly to that, and we could probably say something more about this relationship between information and space during the discussion afterwards. But anyway, I believe that I think that there is a very important link between the game worlds and the design of game worlds and ubiquitous computing. And ubiquitous computing is basically an approach to computer technology and to human-computer interaction that is about making computing technology an omnipresent feature of everyday life. And for those of you who have been reading Bolter and Grusin, they say that ubiquitous computing is an extreme form of hypermediacy. It's about really making the technology visible in all kind of all parts of everyday life. And I think that this is basically a misunderstanding of what ubiquitous computing is about. Because I look at ubiquitous computing as something more context sensitive, where technology is integrated and domesticated into daily activities. It's about technology that should be integrated in a way that feels non-intrusive by being made familiar to that context that is in. And if you look at what Donald Norman would say about this approach to computing or to information or information technology, is that the interface is something that aids, something that does not get into the way, and above all, something that does not attract attention and energy to itself. It's something that is remarkable. It's making technology remarkable in that environment that it is, and also makes it provide the necessary contextual information. And I think this is very important for understanding game worlds. It's about making, regardless of how you decide to put the information into the game world, whether you try to use the approach for Uncharted 3 or World of Warcraft, it's about making or interface technology, making the technology for interaction a familiar part of the game world. And that's also why these game worlds are different, because there are different genres, they invite different kinds of play styles and different kinds of interaction. So in Uncharted 3, an important part of the gameplay is to try to figure out how to manipulate the game world, how to interact with the game world. And that's why you don't really need all that, augmentation, so the overlay information in that game world. But instead, the technology is kind of hidden because it supports a very specific kind of gameplay. In World of Warcraft, on the other hand, you will have these exclamation marks, you have these overlay information because it supports a different kind of game play. But of course, these elements, for the player, these elements do not feel unwelcome. They do not feel intrusive or not part of the world that you're interacting with. Instead, they are a natural part of that. And they also, in that sense, support ubiquitous computing. So I believe that this is basically where I'm going to create a very specific critique of Bolton and Grusin. You cannot say that ubiquitous computing is the same as immediacy. It's not the kind of transparency that they're looking for, the transparency that aims towards removing all kinds of system information and tries to create the illusion that you are actually interacting with this game world, but it's unmediated. And it's not hypermediacy, even though they argue that it's virtual reality turned inside out and an extreme version of hypermediacy, because it's not, ubiquitous computing is not about overexposing the mediation process. Instead, it's about making the tools for interaction feel natural, while not drawing attention towards themselves, but instead drawing attention towards the interaction itself. Okay, so in conclusion, I know that this has been, I was aiming towards using a lot of examples, but I realized that this has become a very theoretical presentation, much more theoretical than I aimed for. But anyway, in conclusion, we could say that the game world interface, it's the game world as an interface between the player and game system. That's the point of departure of this. But what exactly I mean about that is that the game world is not reduced to a communicative tool. On the contrary, I see the interface as something that we can elevate to content rather than medium. The game world interface is basically the game we're playing. It's where we interact with the game. We don't have, once we are kind of getting ourselves familiarized with the game world, we don't really care about the system behind, but we're playing the game by interacting with the game world. And the consequence of this is that I believe that all kinds of game information, regardless of how they're represented in the game world, must be considered part of that game world environment. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any questions?
Thanks for an interesting presentation. I think it's a great achievement to get over this dichotomy between the game and the interface. Question then becomes, there used to be for this this theory, this explanation, this description of computer games, there used to be this sort of enigma point for the description between the game and the interface. This question of where does the interface stop and the game or the game world begin? Now you have gotten rid of this problem. But the question is then, is there such enigma point for this kind of explanation, or have you gotten over the issue of there being one?
Well, I kind of realized that for many people, depending on kind of approach you take, you will of course see that there could be still a dichotomy between the two. But I think that's exactly what you're saying. I'm trying to kind of get rid of that dichotomy, and I believe, at least for for my inner self, I believe that I think I've solved it. I'm content.
But it would be
With
interesting
this
to know if you
understanding,
have
but-
created a new dichotomy in the process.
Oh yeah, perhaps I have. Absolutely, it could absolutely be dichotomies, and I think that one problem that I'm having at the moment is talking about this, because I need to, be talking for 20 minutes in order to kind of explain my point of departure. Like, I don't really have any shortcuts in describing these things. So when I'm discussing this, for instance, I'm talking about features in the game that are not diegetic, but non-diegetic. Of course, then I don't really have any terminology for describing that. I need to use the words diegetic and non-diegetic, even though those are some of the terms that I want to get rid of. So yeah, absolutely, I see that there is a terminological problem that hasn't really been solved, even though conceptually I'm kind of content with this new understanding.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very good about the fact that you focus the attention on affordances offered by the Gameworld interface. But just a question as a counterfactor. If we change the interface of the Gameworld, are we creating another game at all?
Yes, I would think so. But well, to start from another angle, I don't think you can just change the interface, because you will always have to create some kind of interface that is reflecting the gameplay, right? So you can't just remove the interface in World of Warcraft and think that this is okay. Now I've created another game. We just kind of removed the options for interacting with the game world, which is kind of making the game probably unnecessarily harder. The same thing about Uncharted 3. If you are adding a lot of overlay information to that, perhaps you're probably just disturbing the player with a lot of unnecessary information, because the game world itself does contain the information that is necessary for interacting with it. So yeah, you can't just change it.
Oh, just a question. I was wondering, do you consider the player's participation in the interaction with the interface as part of the interface as you design it? Because you seem to be trying to have an idea of a very dynamic notion of the interface as something which is kind of has to do with action and interaction. But would the player's participation be a part of that kind of interface as a whole?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean about the player's participation here. I mean, if you're talking about the player's participation through hardware and a hardware interface, of course it would be part of that. And of course you can't really, I mean, interaction is part of playing games. You can't really consider anything that goes on in the game without also considering the player's interaction, right?
The experiential engagement with the game.
Like the emotional part, or the specific physical?
All of it.
Well, yes, I absolutely would say that that's a very necessary part of understanding, perhaps not the interface, but at least I think it's very hard to talk about interface without talking also about the interaction. So in that sense, I must say, yes, they are part of the same thing.
I think this the concept of game world that you're working with here is makes a lot of sense, and is very productive. I'm thinking about the relationship between this sort of correct approach in one sense, conceptual approach, and people's intuitions. People still go on and think about interface and the game world. I'm not in the world. I'm outside the world. Why is this plastered on my world? This stuff. So I'm speculating. This is kind of a comment. I'm speculating. What could those intuitions be directed against? This intuition of game world, which excludes and sets up, interface is a different thing. So I'm thinking in terms of these graphical or these information, you call them overlays. So one candidate, I'm speculating on people's intuitions here. One candidate would be the world, would be the cinematic thing, The world is what the characters can hear and understand and perceive. And these characters in that story world, they can't see those things. Okay, so that's one candidate, and I guess that kind of world would correspond to a traditional concept of diegesis. I guess, you know, non-diegetic music and all that. What exists in the world of the characters? This is a kind of an interesting, you know. But another option is that maybe the intuition is directed against the world in which some of this overlay belongs to the world. Namely, that the kinds of overlays that you can, that are not really, you can walk around, you know, shiny things, information. When you walk around can you walk around the words, the sentences? Do you see them? Will you see the sentence as mirrored when you walk to the other side of the information? You see what I mean? Yeah. So there is a world here that is not the world of the characters, is not your game world, but which is some sort of other thing where absolutely these things belong. So what would be your guess about people's intuitions? Well, sorry, long question.
Yes, I'm trying to be short about this but this is a very long discussion, as you know, and I think that if you consider the game world as a game world in the sense that I'm considering it, of course all these elements are part of it, and of course you actually have empirical proof of that in World of Warcraft. Of course, you have these people have name tags above their heads. But of course, if you go around the character, the name tag will just move together with it, so you will see it from the front at all times. But it's there in 3D space. You can go around it, and I would say that of course these elements are part of the game world because it provides information that is relevant for the interaction you have with that game world. But if you consider it as a fictional world, of course it would, or just a pure, you know, traditional diegetic world. Of course, you could say that no, of course the character in this world do not see these elements. But, well, I think I'm quoting you when in your dissertation when I say that in a game world, a world made for gameplay interaction, perhaps you can very well say that the characters do see these elements. And I think that that's basically one of the answers to that. They do see the elements because it's a game world. And here is where this functional relationship is coming into being.
A short question from Espen.
Thank you, Kristine. I know that this is a very thorny term to get to grips with, but I wonder if it's not different from different games. So, if we're playing chess, for instance, there's a game world. But if I'm telephoning my moves to you and you are sending me postcards with the moves back, and I keep the game in my mind because I'm such a brilliant chess player, and you have a board. I think there's a difference between interfaces and game world. World of Warcraft is a problematic example, as you know, because people make their own interface mods on top of the game world. And so maybe if the game world is an interface, what do you call those things that people make and put on top of it? That's my question.
Well, that's augmentations to that game world. I don't think that's a problem at all. I think it's just, that's kind of, it's stressing my point that all these elements, they are there to kind of make interaction easier, and they have this really very close functional relationships to actual events in the game world. So absolutely, I mean, augmentations like mods in World of Warcraft, they are also part of that game world, absolutely. They're just different kinds of ways of representing game mechanics and actions you can actually take in that game world.
Okay, I think this is the last talk before lunch, and thank you very much to Kristine.